Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
You ever have one of those moments where it hits you, not like a slap, but like one of those cold plunges into reality where your whole body stiffens and your gut drops at the same time, and suddenly you realize you were never the favorite. And maybe you never even mattered that much to begin with? That's what it felt like, sitting alone in my living room, 31 candles unlit on an untouched chocolate cake I had bought myself from Kroger because even the damn bakery clerk asked me who it was for, and I was too embarrassed to say, me. So I lied and said, my coworker. What else could I say? My parents forgot my birthday for the 5th year in a row, and I'm celebrating it alone again like some pathetic sitcom character nobody even bothers to write a decent arc for? Yeah, no. Didn't have the guts for that truth. I knew what day it was. I wasn't confused. I hadn't made a mistake. It was May 22nd, and I'd woken up that morning thinking, maybe this time. Maybe they'd call. Maybe I'd get a card in the mail, or a clumsy voicemail with my dad's raspy, "Hey, kiddo," and my mom's classic, "We're so proud of you." But when noon rolled around and my phone stayed quiet, I still held on. When evening came and the silence had settled in like a fog, I finally gave up and opened Instagram. That was the real slap, the kind that made my eyes sting and my jaw clench. Katie, my baby sister, was tagged in a dozen posts. There she was, grinning like a toothpaste commercial in front of a brand new cherry red Jeep, that massive red bow on the hood like we were living inside a damn Lexus commercial. Mom had posted a boomerang of Katie jumping up and down, crying tears of joy while Dad handed her the keys. The caption read, "Our baby girl's dream come true. She deserves the world. Happy birthday, sunshine." I watched it 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But nope. It was real. The likes were piling up, neighbors, relatives, people from our church commenting things like, "So proud of her," and "She's such a blessing." Meanwhile, my phone screen was a cold slab of nothing. No missed calls. No texts. No happy birthday. Not from Mom. Not from Dad. Not even from Katie, who, as far as I knew, was still under the impression we were close, whatever that meant in her glittery, filtered world where problems were aesthetic and family was a performance. And here's the part that really dug in deep. It wasn't just the forgetting. It was the consistency of it. The sheer, clockwork predictability of their neglect. This wasn't a one-time thing, an accident, or some busy week fluke. It had been 5 straight years of radio silence on my birthday, while Katie got showers of gifts, public adoration, and doting parents who acted like she'd cured cancer every time she finished a semester of community college. The last time they remembered mine, I was 26, and they sent me a $20 Olive Garden gift card that had already been used once. You'd think at some point I'd get used to it. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. You act like you're above it, like birthdays are for kids and you're too busy to care anyway. But that's a lie. A big, stupid lie we tell ourselves to avoid the ache. Because when it comes down to it, no matter how old you are, no matter how independent or hardened you think you've become, there's still that tiny part of you that wants to be seen, especially by the people who made you. That wants just one damn day where you aren't the afterthought. So I did something I hadn't done in a while. I called them. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say. Honestly, I think I just wanted to hear their voices. Maybe part of me still hoped they'd say, "Oh my God, we're so sorry, we completely blinked." I could have forgiven that. I could have forgiven a simple, human mistake. But when my mom picked up, chipper as ever, and said, "Oh hey honey, you caught us, we're out grabbing dinner with Katie. Isn't today her birthday?" Wait, no, hers was yesterday, what's up? I swear, something cracked in me. I paused, just long enough for her to notice. She said, "Rachel? You still there?" "Yeah," I said, swallowing the tremor in my voice. "You didn't forget today's my birthday, did you?" There was a beat of silence, that awkward shuffle of thoughts. Then, in her practiced tone, soft and airy like she was smoothing over a stain she didn't want to see, she said, "Oh honey. I mean, we figured you weren't big on birthdays. You never really make a fuss, so we just assumed, you know." "Assumed what?" I asked, louder than I meant to. "That you were over it," she said, a little edge of defensiveness slipping in now. I mean, you're 31. Isn't that a bit old for all this? That was it. That right there was the moment I felt it, not anger, not sadness. Just hollow. Like something had been scooped out of me. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Just hung up, turned my phone face down on the table, and sat there in silence while the cake I'd bought started to sweat in the summer heat. Tell me something. What would you do if your parents forgot your birthday 5 years in a row, then turned around and handed your sister a brand new Jeep with tears in their eyes? Would you call them out? Would you cry? Would you just swallow it down again and pretend it didn't matter? Or would you do what I did, burn the bridge, cut the rope, and finally ask yourself, what if I stopped pretending these people ever loved me the same? Because that's where this story really begins. And believe me, it gets a whole lot messier from here. I didn't wake up the next morning with some big plan for revenge, or with some fire in my chest screaming for justice, or even with a hangover from drowning my feelings in boxed wine like I had on my 29th. I just woke up numb. Not the kind of numb where you cry yourself into silence, but the kind that feels like your entire emotional spectrum has been packed into a box and shoved into the back of a closet labeled "Not Urgent." I stared at the wall across from my bed for what must have been 20 minutes, not even really thinking, just existing, stuck in that silent, echoing vacuum where nothing matters enough to move you. No messages had come overnight. No, sorry we forgot. No, belated happy birthday from my mom. Not even a lazy heart emoji from Katie. And somehow, that silence made more noise in my head than any screaming match ever could. By the time I dragged myself into the kitchen and poured a stale cup of yesterday's coffee, the decision had already formed in my mind, not like a thunderbolt or some dramatic vow, but more like a quiet click of a lock behind me. I was done. Done explaining myself. Done lowering the bar just to feel loved. Done pretending that "it's just how they are" was a good enough excuse for years of invisible birthdays, forgotten graduations, and passive-aggressive holiday dinners where Katie's vegan casserole was praised like the second coming while my entire existence sat somewhere in the background like a slightly inconvenient piece of furniture. I was 31 years old. I paid my own bills. I hadn't asked them for a damn thing in over a decade. And still, somehow, I was the one always feeling like I owed them something: gratitude, forgiveness, understanding, patience, whatever. Well, I didn't owe them anything anymore. I blocked their numbers before breakfast. It felt impulsive in the moment, but not explosive, more like finally removing a splinter that had been buried deep under my skin for years. I didn't post about it online. I didn't text a group chat looking for validation. I just did it. Simple as that. I wasn't looking for drama. I wanted silence. I wanted peace. I wanted to stop pretending that being the family disappointment was something I had to wear like a badge of shame when the truth was, I was just the one who stopped performing. But the silence I wanted, peaceful, healing, cathartic, wasn't the silence I got. It took less than a day. 24 hours after I went dark, the calls started pouring in, but not to me. They called my best friend Laura, who they hadn't spoken to in years, asking if I was okay and telling her I'd been acting out of character and that maybe something had happened. They called my job, and asked the front desk to confirm if I'd shown up that morning. My mom left a voicemail for my ex-boyfriend, who she never liked when we were together, sobbing into the phone about how I had vanished and might be having a breakdown. I hadn't vanished. I just stopped responding. I chose quiet, and they responded with chaos. I could feel it even without hearing their voices. The panic wasn't about my well-being. It was about control. About the narrative. Because when you're the scapegoat, the family shadow, the afterthought who quietly swallows everything and keeps the boat from rocking, the moment you step off that boat, the rest of the family starts to wobble. My absence wasn't a crisis because they missed me, it was a crisis because now someone might notice the emptiness I left behind. Or worse, ask questions they didn't want to answer. The tipping point came 3 days later when I received a FedEx envelope at my apartment. No return address, but the handwriting on the label was unmistakably my mother's, tight, looping, forced cursive that always looked like it belonged on church bulletins and PTA flyers. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, torn from a pad, with a short handwritten note. No, dear Rachel. No love, Mom. Just a few tight lines in blue ink. We don't know what we did to make you so cruel, but this isn't how family works. You can't just walk away. This kind of behavior is exactly why things are the way they are. We gave you everything, and you throw it back in our faces. That's not love. That's spite. Maybe this will remind you of what matters. Tucked behind the note was a check, $10,000, signed and dated, crisp and clean like it had never even been folded. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a bribe. It was a message dressed up in generosity. This is what you think love is? Fine. Here's your price tag. And for a second, just a second, I almost ripped it up because the idea that my pain could be fixed with a check felt like the final insult. But then I paused. Not out of greed. Not out of revenge. Well, maybe a little bit out of revenge. But mostly because I realized something they never would, that I didn't need their money. But someone else might. Someone who mattered more to me than these two people who only knew how to love when it made them look good. So I cashed it. And I had a very specific plan for how to use it. They wanted to play emotional poker? Fine. Let's raise the stakes. Because if they thought silence was the worst thing I could do, they hadn't seen what I could do with their full attention. There's something almost poetic about revenge when it's quiet, not the kind that shows up with a flaming bag on the doorstep or an all-caps Facebook status, but the kind you fold gently into the folds of your day, calm and methodical. Like ironing a wrinkle into someone else's curtain while they aren't even home. That check, that insult dressed as generosity, that $10,000 slap in the face that was supposed to make me rethink everything, I held it in my hand for a full hour before I did anything with it, just staring at it like it was a riddle I had to solve, a test I had to pass. Because the old me, the version of myself they were used to, the one who kept the peace, who swallowed the bitterness, who accepted less and smiled through it, that version would have torn the check in half or mailed it back with a snarky note and called it a win. But that wasn't me anymore. The woman who stood in that living room, 10 years into adulthood and 5 birthdays deep into disappointment, was tired of symbolic victories and empty declarations. I didn't want to make a point. I wanted to make a scar. There was this patient at my dental practice, a single mom named Valerie who had been coming in for almost 2 years, never once complaining even when she could only afford partial treatments, always bringing her nonverbal 7-year-old son Noah with her because she didn't have anyone else to watch him. Noah would sit in the corner with his headphones on and a little fidget toy in his lap, rocking gently and humming to himself while she got her teeth cleaned, and every time she left, she'd apologize like she was causing us some kind of burden just by existing. A month earlier, she had mentioned quietly, casually, like someone confessing a crime, that she was about 2 weeks away from being evicted. Her landlord had raised the rent again, her job at the school cafeteria hadn't upped her hours, and she didn't have family to fall back on. She'd said it with a smile, like she was already used to not being helped, like she'd already made peace with sleeping in her car. And I remember thinking how wrong it was, how deeply wrong, that someone like her, who worked, who parented, who showed up every damn day without ever asking for more than the minimum, was invisible in this world. While people like my sister were handed SUVs with big red bows because they posted enough selfies. I called Valerie that night. I told her I had a friend who worked with housing assistance, someone who had a fund to help bridge the gap on emergency rentals, and that I could pull a few strings if she'd let me. She cried. Not the loud kind, just that stunned silence where you know the other person's eyes have filled so quickly they can't even speak. And 2 days later, I used that check, every penny of it, to cover her past due rent, her next 3 months' worth, and the deposit on a little place closer to Noah's school, where she wouldn't have to ride 2 buses each way just to get him to his therapy appointments. She never asked questions about where the money came from, and I never volunteered it. Because it wasn't about her knowing. It was about me knowing that I'd taken what was supposed to be their leverage, their guilt-tripping olive branch, and used it to build something they couldn't touch. I didn't expect anyone to find out. I didn't post about it, didn't text my friends, didn't even mention it to Laura, who would have turned it into some kind of folktale by brunch. But secrets have a way of leaking through the seams, especially in a town like mine, where gossip spreads faster than pollen in spring, and everyone knows someone who knows someone. I wasn't entirely shocked when I saw the first hint of it online, a vague tweet from someone who worked at the local housing nonprofit, thanking an anonymous donor for stepping in last minute to save a struggling family. But I was absolutely floored when I saw my sister's name pop up in the replies, with her classic signature of passive-aggressive sparkle. Isn't it wild when people go out of their way to help others just to feel superior? I'd rather give from the heart, not for attention. At first, I thought maybe it was coincidence. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe it wasn't even about me. But within an hour, she posted a full Instagram story, a photo of her holding a Bible, captioned, "God sees what's real." Some people need to manipulate suffering to validate their bitterness. Sad. And, just like that, the game was on. The thing about Katie is she's always been good at weaponizing softness. She plays the doe-eyed innocent better than anyone I've ever met. She knows how to make herself the victim even when she's holding the knife, and this time was no different. Within a day, she had painted herself as the loving daughter trying to hold the family together while her angry sister lashed out with performative kindness and a martyr complex. She posted screenshots of text messages from our mom, messages that twisted what I'd said into sound bites of cruelty, me saying I didn't want a relationship anymore, me saying they could keep their money, me saying I didn't think they were my real family. Out of context, it sounded cold. I'll admit that. But in context, it was survival. I didn't respond. I didn't feed the fire. Because I wasn't finished yet. But then came the voicemail from my father, of all people, who never once in my adult life had raised his voice to me, never once picked a side that wasn't covered in Mom's perfume or Katie's lip gloss. His voice was low, calm, but laced with something I hadn't heard since I was 17 and got caught sneaking out to see a boy in a borrowed car, disappointment. He said, "You want to play dirty, Rachel? Fine. Let's play. But don't expect to win." And that's when I knew I hadn't just cut ties. I had declared war. And I had no intention of losing. It's strange, in a sick sort of way, how quickly a family's need to protect its image can twist into something that doesn't just resemble betrayal. It becomes something worse. Something that feels like a slow-motion assassination of character wrapped in concerned phone calls and sugar-coated accusations, all under the flag of love and worry. I had expected backlash, maybe a scolding message or another veiled post from Katie, but what I didn't expect, not in a million years, was for my parents to go full scorched earth on my life, like I was some PR disaster they had to contain before I embarrassed them in front of the neighbors. It started, ironically, not with shouting or confrontation, but with silence, 3 full days of nothing, like the eye of a hurricane, and then it came, sharp and sudden like the twist of a knife you didn't know was already buried in your back. I found out from my office manager first. Nancy, who's worked at the front desk of the dental clinic for nearly 15 years and doesn't gossip unless something actually matters, pulled me aside on a Wednesday afternoon with a look on her face that made my stomach drop before she even opened her mouth. She said, very gently, "Rachel, I got a call this morning, someone claiming to be a family member. They said they were worried about you. Said you'd been acting erratic, possibly stealing from the petty cash, and might be under some kind of mental strain." I stood there frozen, the words not even making sense at first because they were so ludicrous, so disconnected from the person I am, from the quiet, capable way I've always done my job without fail, without drama, without even taking sick days unless I was dying. But even as I blinked and tried to formulate a response, I already knew, without needing to ask, that it was my parents, or more likely, my mother, with her silky manipulations and her newfound desperation to destroy anything she couldn't control. Because what's more dangerous to someone like her than a daughter who not only walks away but refuses to come back when summoned? I assured Nancy it was a misunderstanding, and to her credit, she didn't seem to buy a word of the caller's accusations, but the damage had been done. The seed had been planted. The suggestion was there, hanging in the air like smoke from a fire you couldn't quite see, and I walked back to my station with a tremble in my hands I couldn't shake off for the rest of the day. By that evening, it had escalated. Laura texted me screenshots from a private Facebook group we both grew up around, the local church circle, a collection of women who love Jesus almost as much as they love thinly veiled judgment, and there it was, a long, emotionally manipulative post written by none other than my mother, talking about how a parent's heart breaks when their child turns away from the light, how we're asking for prayers for Rachel during this difficult time, how we believe in redemption and healing, even for those who've lost their way. It was so sickeningly vague and loaded with coded language that only someone fluent in the dialect of churchy manipulation would fully appreciate its elegance. She hadn't named me, of course, but she didn't have to. Everyone in that group knew who our oldest daughter was, the one who stopped speaking to us after we tried to help her see the damage she was causing. Within minutes, the comments rolled in, full of concern and virtue-signaling pity, lifting her up in prayer. God brings prodigals home. We're here for you, sweet friend. And right there, under all the saccharine well wishes, was Katie, posting a photo of the two of them at brunch with the caption, "Family is everything. Always." If it had ended there, I might have laughed it off. I might have rolled my eyes and let it die its natural death in the cesspool of digital martyrdom. But of course, it didn't end there. Because someone, I didn't know who, but I could guess, sent an anonymous tip to the regional dental board, claiming that I'd been practicing under distress and might be endangering patients. It didn't stick, of course. My records were spotless, my reviews impeccable, and there wasn't a shred of evidence to back it up. But just having to sit in a review hearing to defend myself against an accusation so laughably false yet so precisely cruel left me hollowed out in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager trying to explain to my father that I didn't roll my eyes at dinner. To be disrespectful, I did it because my sister had just been handed a credit card while I got lectured for wanting $20 for a field trip. That's when I knew they didn't want me back. They didn't want resolution. They wanted ruin. Because if I couldn't be controlled, then I had to be discredited. And if I couldn't be discredited, then I had to be destroyed. Not physically, not in a dramatic movie villain way, but in the slow, paper-cut kind of way that poisons your name in polite circles, that leaves you explaining yourself for the rest of your life. That stains your reputation with just enough suspicion to make everyone blink a little longer when your name comes up in conversation. So I did what they didn't expect. I fought back. Not with rage. Not with tears. But with something far more lethal: truth. I had known for a while that Katie's carefully curated image, that sunny influencer life full of devotionals and daily affirmations and tastefully posed lattes, was more performance than substance. What I hadn't expected was just how much she had to hide. I'd forgotten, until recently, about the night 2 years ago when she drunkenly confessed over wine that she never actually finished her online degree. That she paid some guy she met in a forum to take her last 4 classes because she couldn't deal with the stress, and it's just community college, who cares? She'd laughed it off then, confident that no one would ever ask for a transcript. But I remembered. And I also remembered the fake graduation photos she'd posted, the proud of our girl posts from my parents, the LinkedIn profile she built around that non-existent degree. So I sent an anonymous tip to the job she'd just been offered, a youth leadership position at the same church that had commented prayers under my mother's post. I included screenshots. I included proof. And while I didn't get confirmation, I noticed within a week that the job was no longer listed under her name. Her profile went private. The next family photo she posted didn't include a caption at all. But that wasn't all. A friend of a friend, someone who worked in social media moderation, forwarded me a deleted account that had been tied to an anonymous content page. It was nothing illegal, nothing explicit, just different. Soft-core modeling, suggestive content, thinly veiled as empowerment. Nothing wrong with it, unless, of course, you're applying for leadership at a church that preaches abstinence and modesty and hosts mother-daughter purity banquets every spring. I never said a word publicly. I never posted a thing. But I watched the carefully stacked tower they'd built, block by block, start to wobble. And I felt no guilt when it leaned a little too far and began to fall. They wanted a war? They got one. And I wasn't finished. There's a moment in every long, slow-burning conflict where the original wound becomes almost irrelevant, where the details of who said what and when they said it start to blur into the background. And all that remains is the unspoken truth that something sacred has been shattered beyond recognition, and no amount of pretending or posturing will ever glue it back together. I had reached that point. The battle lines were no longer about forgotten birthdays or gifted Jeeps or public humiliation disguised as family concern. It had evolved, or maybe devolved, into something deeper, something primal, something that no longer needed to be spoken aloud, because we all knew, without question, that the war wasn't just about me walking away. It was about the fact that I had dared to take control of my own narrative, and that single, uncooperative act threatened the very foundation my parents had spent decades constructing, the illusion of a perfect family. So when my father texted, not called, not emailed, but texted 3 words, "We need to talk," I stared at the message for 10 full minutes, wondering if it was bait, if it was just another performance, or if, by some miracle, they were ready to face what they'd done. I didn't respond right away. I went to work. I cleaned teeth. I made polite conversation. I laughed when appropriate and nodded when required. But the whole time, that message echoed in my skull like a ticking metronome, and by the time I clocked out, I knew what I had to do. I agreed to meet them at their house. Not a neutral place. Not a coffee shop. I wanted them to sit in their curated living room, surrounded by family portraits where I always looked slightly out of frame, always positioned a half step behind Katie like a misplaced extra in someone else's show. I wanted them to see me walk through the front door, not as the obedient daughter or the prodigal child returning with head bowed, but as the woman they had underestimated for the last damn time. When I arrived, the door was already open, as if they expected me to hesitate. My mother stood in the foyer, arms crossed, not cold but calculating, her expression carefully assembled to suggest concern without conceding fault. My father was seated on the couch, elbows on knees, face drawn and tight like a man preparing for surgery without anesthesia. Katie, of course, was absent. She never liked being in the room when real things happened. The first 5 minutes were polite, suffocatingly so. My mother asked if I wanted tea, as if the last month hadn't been a full-blown campaign to publicly ruin my reputation. I declined. My father said they were worried about me, which, given the circumstances, landed with the subtlety of a brick through glass. I let them talk, not because I cared about what they had to say, but because I needed to hear how far they'd go to avoid accountability. And then my mother, in her familiar soft-laced tone, dropped the sentence that derailed everything. "Rachel, we've always done our best with you. We know you feel unseen, but you've never made it easy to love you. Not like Katie." It was so casually cruel, so thoughtless and deeply revealing, that for a moment, I forgot to breathe. My father looked away, eyes locking on a speck of something on the carpet, as if the universe might provide an escape if he stared hard enough. I stood up then, not to leave, but because I couldn't sit through another second of pretending. I said, very calmly, "You didn't forget my birthday. You ignored it. You chose to. And that's not the same thing." My mother started to interrupt, some can line about miscommunication or being busy, but I raised my hand, an old habit I'd learned from school, from church, from all the places where girls were trained to speak only when invited, and I said, Don't lie to me. Not anymore." And then something unexpected happened. My father cleared his throat, and for the first time in this entire circus, he looked at me, not through me, not past me, but directly into the storm of my expression, and he said something that pulled the ground out from under every conclusion I thought I'd drawn. He said, "You were never supposed to know." It was such an odd thing to say that I actually laughed, sharp and humorless, but he didn't smile. He looked pale, older than I remembered, as if the burden of something long buried had finally begun to rot from the inside. My mother said his name sharply, like a warning, but he ignored her and continued, slowly, deliberately, like someone peeling back a bandage he'd kept hidden for decades. "She wasn't planned," he said, nodding toward the family photos on the wall. "Katie wasn't expected, and we almost didn't go through with it. But when she came, your mother changed. She latched onto her in a way she never did with you. We told ourselves it was just postpartum hormones, that it would pass. But it never did. She saw Katie as fragile, special, needing protection. You were older, independent, stronger. You didn't cry as much. You didn't cling. And over time, we stopped noticing what that did to you. My mother's face had gone stone still, her mouth tight, her arms crossed so hard they looked like they were welded together. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, trapped in the knowledge that the carefully woven narrative was beginning to fray. I don't remember sitting back down, but I must have, because I remember staring at the floor and thinking how many times I'd walked across these floorboards believing I was crazy. Believing I was oversensitive, dramatic, ungrateful. And all along, I had simply been right. There wasn't an apology. Not a real one. There were a few limp admissions, a few half-hearted "we didn't realize" and "we're sorry if" phrases that left more poison than balm. But I didn't need their words. I had already gotten what I came for, the truth, raw and unbeautiful, lying there on the floor like a broken mirror. I told them I was leaving, that I didn't know if I'd come back, that I didn't want more tea, more conversations, more explanations. I wanted space. I wanted distance. And I wanted, more than anything, to never again be told who I was by people who never really saw me to begin with. As I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, not lighter, not like I'd escaped something, but like I'd walked away from a grave I'd finally stopped pretending wasn't there. And yet, even as I drove home, even as I turned off my phone and let the world go quiet, I kept hearing one question over and over in my head, the one no one had asked me, the one I hadn't asked myself until that moment: if I had grown up being seen, being chosen, being cherished, would I even recognize myself? Maybe they built the lie, but I chose to live in it. And maybe, in the end, that's what hurts the most.